Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Cafe on Air podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Big Italy 42, joined here with my comrade, Spencer Limbach. You may know him as Spencer JL on Twitter. We got a great slate tonight. This podcast is going to feature DraftKings salaries and some strategy who we're looking at in tournaments and cash games. And how we doing today, Spencer?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Hey, not bad, man. I'm excited about some of these big tournaments. You got the main event here on DraftKings, $400,000 prize pool, $100K to first place. So I'm looking forward to taking that one down myself.
Yeah, I mean your lineup's gonna have to be firing on all cylinders, but I mean that's what we're gonna go over today. Some high upside guys who could really help you out in a tournament. So
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, we got a big slate, like we mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off. We're going position by position here, giving you a little bit of what we're looking at each spot. Starting off at point guard, the obvious top play, Steph Curry, 9,500 today against Dallas, who struggles against point guards, despite the fact that Charles Barkley last night at halftime of the game was talking about how Rajon Rondo is a very good defender. Not sure where he heard or saw that,
but he doesn't look at analytics, does he?
or
He just
games.
kind of well, yeah. I mean, I have a feeling he watches highlights and whatnot, and he just kind of sees something in a 3-second clip, and then he just draws conclusions, and that's his opinion for the season.
Yeah.
I mean, he said Golden State really didn't stand a chance in the playoffs because they're a jump shooting team, and jump shooting teams don't win. It's like, did he watch the 2011 season when the Mavericks won it all? I mean, sometimes he just doesn't really know what he's talking about.
He
But
just talks to hear himself, I think. I mean, he sees
yeah,
Rondo get a steal and thinks he's a great defender because someone
yeah,
tossed it into his arms. But either way, Stephen Curry, great price tag on DraftKings, 9,500. Got great upside in what should be a nice battle in this one. So he your top option as well?
he is at point guard definitely. Can't beat that price tag. The only question I have is how concerned are you with a blowout here? I mean, Golden State at home. Dallas has been kind of struggling. They have some injuries. I didn't see is Chandler Parsons back for this game.
No, Parsons still out. And also,
Still.
I saw on Twitter, I think it was Michael Gallagher talking about how this is the only back-to-back for Dallas this month. So obviously a risk that Dirk Nowitzki sits out as well. And if that's the case, then we're going to need some quick action from Steph Curry over the first three quarters to pay off that tag.
Yeah, and I mean, this is Golden State's coming home following that long road trip. I mean, they usually play better at home. Dallas on a back-to-back.
Yeah, and it's a 10-point
It could
spread too.
happen. And there's a lot of expensive guys like Harden and Anthony Davis that we'll touch on later. That, I mean, you could go that route too. So I don't think Curry's a must-play. Obviously, he's someone you really want to consider in this matchup, but you could go value at point guard and then bump up to the other guys too. So
Yeah, and especially on a big slate tonight in that big tournament, you have a big guy like Curry go for 35 points, and your chance of winning the top prize there are pretty much done for. So
yeah,
definitely pick your spots wisely. A couple other guys I really like at their price points. Guy that's playing really well, Goran Dragic, 6,600. I think he's in a fine spot tonight, and he's facing going up against Washington. John Wall, not a great matchup, but John Wall is having to do quite a bit on offense right now. Goran Dragic, Dwayne Wade's playing better right now, but still, Dragic is finally getting comfortable in that role. He's played well the last two games, despite just small minutes against the Suns. So, is he someone you're targeting again tonight too?
I really didn't have him on my list, but I mean, I would be checking Luol Deng's status.
Yeah, still
If Deng is
questionable
out,
last I saw.
yeah, if Deng is out, there's more production to go around. I mean, he's not a guy who takes a lot of shots, but I mean, still, it'll be a small uptick for Wade and Dragic, and he's fairly priced and someone who has a reasonable chance at hitting his value threshold. So yeah, I mean, he's in consideration.
Yeah. Another guy you got to obviously consider is price tag rising by the day. Mo Williams, 7,300 on DraftKings tonight, but 4 straight point games over 40 fantasy points. Obviously, a little bit of risk there. It does look like Kyle Lowry is expected to play tonight, so Mo Williams should be a popular play. Might be an interesting spot to fade him. Not that I'm recommending that. What are your thoughts here on Mo?
I like him. The matchup is okay. I mean, it's above average. It's not nothing exceptional. Basically, when considering Mo Williams, we just have to look at. I mean, we can't bank on his recent production, but his usage rate is up. He's assisting the ball at such a high clip. I mean, he has to be considered even for that rising price point. And I'm reading a blurb here on Roto World that he's going to remain the starter in Charlotte when Kemba Walker comes back. So, I mean, they're putting the ball in his hands. They want him to make plays, and he's running the show there. So, yeah, I mean, you could pencil him in at 7.3, and I think that's still maybe a tad underpriced, considering what he's capable of, especially in a tournament.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it before. I mean, really no one else there that can create their own shot outside of Al Jefferson. So he is the option there when they need scoring. They get behinds, things like that. He's going to be the volume shooter. So definitely a significant upside there, but he should be pretty highly owned, I would assume, tonight.
Yeah.
A couple other guys I think are underpriced. You've got Jeff Teague, 6,400. We talked about him last week. He was struggling there for a little while. Last 2 games finally turned it back around. 37 fantasy points against Houston last time out. And obviously, matchup against Kyrie Irving. Look at it on paper. Cavs seem like they're good against point guards, but you and I both know Kyrie Irving not a great defender. So I think that certainly some big upside and a huge matchup there with the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, he's an upside pick, and I would classify him purely as such. Not someone I really want to target for security in cash games because, I mean, we've said it before on this podcast, you really don't know where the Atlanta production is going to lie on a given night. They could all, spread it out and have 20 to 25 fantasy points for everyone. I mean, they do that from time to time. So, yes, he's an upside pick if they need him to contribute a lot. Definitely someone to consider in tournaments.
Yeah, and they're pretty much the opposite of of Cleveland there, like you mentioned. I mean, they spread it out a whole lot. Cleveland's value pretty concentrated there, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Obviously, another guy I've been liking quite a bit recently, George Hill. Look at his logs, 4 straight 33-plus fantasy point games going up against Chicago. Aaron Brooks, known as a shooter, not a defender. I think he's a nice tournament play tonight. I don't know that he has elite upside. He did have that triple-double against Cleveland, but I think 35 fantasy points will be a great target for him tonight.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys who always slips through the cracks. I mean, he's not really a highlight pick that, people really try to target, even though he does have upside, like you mentioned. So if you're looking for someone in a tournament, I mean, obviously he's cash game playable too because, I mean, he's running the show for Indiana. The ball's going through him. And but yeah, he's someone that's going to have a low ownership percentage, even though he's been producing as of late.
Yeah, absolutely. One more guy I'm going to touch on here, and I'm going to let you go into someone we had talked about that you liked before the show. Brandon Knight's a guy who's getting big minutes, a 6,200, and you don't expect huge things. He had a 46-point fantasy performance last time, but you obviously aren't expecting those numbers right now, especially with Eric Bledsoe in town, but you can get him at a significant discount from Bledsoe. I think he's a tournament play. Obviously, not a great floor with him right now, but I think he's a guy that once again will go low owned at a tournament and risky, but with some nice upside.
What's his price tag on DraftKings?
6,200.
That's a reasonable price. I would probably rather go with Teague in that spot. It seems like Knight is pretty scoring dependent. And I don't know if I like that. I believe he did have about 6 or 7 assists last game, but that hasn't really been the theme with him in Phoenix, so I wouldn't really rely on that. But I would rather go with Teague or one of those other options in that range, maybe Reggie Jackson, Hill. But, I really wouldn't criticize you for playing Brandon Knight in a tournament either. So
yeah, exactly. I'm with you there. Definitely not a cash game play, but a tournament guy, and took 15 shots last game. So if that continues, he's got some upside. Moving on here, there was someone we were talking about before the show. Who's someone you're looking at here you think is a great play tonight?
I really think Isaiah Thomas is a pretty sneaky play. He had a really bad game against Cleveland. Well, in fact, the whole Boston team had a bad game against Cleveland. So I don't think you can really hold that against him. But other than that game, he has been extremely solid coming off the bench. I mean, his usage rate is massive, and 6K on DraftKings is a pretty steep discount compared to FanDuel and Draft Day and places like that. So pretty comfortable price point, and I'll probably have him in a couple lineups.
Yeah, and the Pelicans not a team that's known as a great defensive team against point guards either. So I think Thomas in a nice spot, and especially coming off the bench, going to see some time against some backups there too. So definitely a great spot.
One more guy I had on my list who's significantly cheaper on DraftKings than FanDuel is Trey Burke. I mean, he had a dud performance last time out. Was it against Memphis?
Yeah, which is excusable.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really hold that against him. He has a lot better draw tonight. And, he's 4.5K on DraftKings and 5.8K on FanDuel. So, I mean, you just look at that value discrepancy, and you can really take advantage of that, especially in tournaments. I mean, he doesn't need to do a whole lot to pay off that price point. So, I mean, keep him in the back of your mind as maybe someone to fill that guard spot or utility spot when you're rounding out your roster.
Yeah, another great thing to think about there is Trey Burke still coming off the bench there. Pretty much the only scoring option that Utah has off the bench, and we know Philly pretty terrible against all positions on the floor. Mm-hmm. And like to think that Trey Burke may get some extra minutes late if Utah locks him down, especially with Robert Covington being questionable. So not many options for Philly to keep this one close. So I like that call. If you're looking for some other cheap guys, these aren't guys I am going to go crazy about, but they're cheap plays, under 5K. You've got Tony Parker, obviously been struggling, but he's had his moments, 4.8. We know he's capable of it. Look at him in a tournament, certainly not a cash game. Jeremy Lin, obviously still playing well, but a tough matchup today against Memphis. And to feel crazy, which I don't, Isaiah Kanan played really well in his last game, 4,500, but
don't do it.
I'm not doing it.
Don't do it.
No.
I mean, some people will try to chase the points from last game, but wow, that was an outlier if I've ever seen one. Him putting up, he made like 6 3-pointers, like 8. Okay. Well, where the hell did that come from? Like,
exactly.
I mean, this is a guy who barely even shot the ball leading up to that, and he was splitting time at point guard. I mean, you just can't bank on that.
No, and he was being out. We talked about it last week. He was being outplayed by Ish Smith pretty much every single night since the two of them were together there. So definitely not somebody I'm going into right now. But I guess at his price tag, decent upside. You don't ever expect that 50-point performance again. Maybe somebody in the mid-20s tonight.
Yeah.
Moving on here to shooting guard. A lot of guys on DraftKings here, fairly priced, so not a lot of elite values that I've been able to find. Obvious top option here, James Harden, 10,400, which is a significantly better price than he is on FanDuel, where he's 11,000. And coming off a matchup against Memphis, where he only scored 18 real points, but managed 49.5 fantasy points with a 13 assists. He's a guy that even when he's not scoring at elite level, which, as we know, he is an elite scorer, one of the best in the game, he can still fill it up, still pay off his salary. So he's a guy I'm going to be targeting quite a bit tonight as one of my top-end options. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really like him up there. And like you said, there's not really a lot of attractively priced options at shooting guards. So if you look at it from an opportunity cost standpoint, it makes sense to pay up for him there and maybe go with more value at the point guard spot or power forward spot if you see a better opportunity there. So, yeah, great situation for him. Detroit, really not that great of a defensive team. So, I mean, he could have his way here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned with the opportunity cost, I mean, James Harden goes off for 60 points here. I mean, on DraftKings, you only have to play one shooting guard, but if you don't play him, your chances, once again, winning that big tournament, pretty much done for. So,
yeah.
Moving down, Eric Bledsoe, a little bit too pricey for my taste, 8.2K against Brooklyn. It's a fine matchup, but, I mean, in order for him to pay off his tag, he's going to have a huge game, and I'm just not expecting it.
Right. I mean, he's playing down in pace. I know Brooklyn doesn't defend shooting guards very well, but you have to look at it from kind of a entire backcourt perspective, and they really profile better in that regard. So, I mean, the matchup is good, but his price tag is, he's priced appropriately or even higher than appropriately. So, I would really be price sensitive when it comes to him, and I'm just not liking that tag on DraftKings.
Yeah, completely agree. And moving down a little bit more, guy that's in a great spot. It's been maybe not a great matchup, but it's been playing very well. kind of vintage play there from Dwayne Wade, 7,300. You don't love the matchup against Washington, but Vegas thinks this one's going to be close. I believe it's a 4-point spread. And he's not playing huge minutes, 31, 33, and 31 his last three, but at least 37 fantasy points in each one of those. So I think he's in play. Right below him, we were looking at DeMar DeRozan, but we mentioned earlier, it looks like Kyle Lowry is going to play. He's not a guy I'll be targeting much outside of maybe a single tournament entry now at 7,200. So you liking Dwayne Wade tonight?
Kind of like I said before, I like him more if Luol Deng's out. He'll have more offensive responsibility, maybe more rebounding chances from the perimeter coming in. I'm actually looking, if I'm going that range, I'm looking towards Victor Oladipo. Great matchup with the Kings. This is a 1-point spread. They're at home. And I just saw over here on Roto World that Evan Fournier and Luke Ridnour are questionable. I mean, if one or both of them sit, he's going to see more playing time. He's going to have the ball in his hands a lot more. And great matchup. And plus that, it's a really good situation for him.
Yeah, and you got to figure also, I mean, Nikola Vucevic going to be matched up with DeMarcus Cousins down low. You got Tobias Harris, I mean, against Rudy Gay. Gay not a great defender, but not an ideal matchup there. So Oladipo against a Sacramento team that has gotten shredded by shooting guards. I think a great play there, 7,000. So we saw 25 shots from him last game. I don't expect that again, but something in between that and the 14 he had the game before, and he should do quite well with this price tag.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah. Moving on down, not a whole lot of other guys I'm really looking at. If you're going to go cheap, it looks like Will Barton had another nice game. I hate to go with more bench players, but going against San Antonio, you got the big point spread. Could be a blowout. Maybe he gets extra run late in the game. 30 minutes last game, 22, 27, 31, a couple before that. Outside of his dud against Milwaukee, he's been a stud. I mean, 32 fantasy points, 34, 27, 39. So are you on the Will Barton train tonight, or are you gonna move on from that?
I am not on the Will Barton train. Maybe in a huge tournament, just to kind of differentiate from the pack and a guy who does have upside in garbage time. So I could really see that rationale, but I'm not going to do it probably.
Yeah, I don't blame you. No need on a huge slate to, especially in your cash games, go into a guy that's a bench player, big point spread. Not a great situation against the Spurs, who are finally playing good defense like they've been known to do. So
they're finally healthy too.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
definitely
that helps.
Anybody else you're looking at shooting guard here? You think that's a nice value here on DraftKings?
Not really. I think we covered it. I mean, I'm mostly looking at Harden and Oladipo. I did have my eye on Lou Williams, but this Lowry news really kind of hurts his stock. So I really don't think I'm going that direction because without Lowry, he's a great play. He sees the volume. With Lowry in, I mean, you really don't know what he's going to do. He could put up 8 fantasy points or 48. I mean, so there's rationale for a tournament in that regard, but really don't like his prospects tonight.
Yeah, and definitely with less shots to go around, like you mentioned, he's definitely not a safe play tonight, but certainly with some upside still. Shooting, small forward now, you got your obvious top option, LeBron James. We already mentioned the big matchup. We know how he likes to get up for these games, and after he was kind of cruising there for a little while, kind of doing whatever he needed to do, help the team to victory, absolutely on a tear recently. 71, 65, 45 in only 26 minutes, and 59 fantasy points his last 4. One of the top options on the slate. How are you feeling about LeBron James tonight?
I don't know. I really don't think I'm going to have too much LeBron tonight, and I don't know if that's a mistake or not. So, I mean, that could really easily change as the day goes along. Maybe some value plays will open up, but I don't know. I would rather dip down to the mid-range for small forward. I don't know. I'm really not feeling it from LeBron tonight. I'm fully aware that he could post another huge line in a close game with Atlanta, but the matchup doesn't profile that great. I know you can't really fully attribute that to LeBron's game because, I mean, no one matches up good against him, so those rankings don't really fully play in, but really don't find myself rostering him too much tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. We mentioned shooting guard, not a lot of great options. James Harden, the obvious top pick. It's going to hurt you, I think, a lot more not having shares of James Harden than it would not having LeBron because of some other options we're going to get to here. You got Kawhi Leonard. I think in a great spot, 7,400. He's been playing well. He's the young stud for the Spurs. Their offense goes as he goes. 37 or more fantasy points in 4 straight games, and last 2 not even playing big minutes, 29 and 32. So he is my number 2 option on this slate. I like Gordon Hayward quite a bit, but at the same time, not expecting Philly to keep this close, and really slow pace there for Utah. So not a guy that I'm going to be going too much into.
Yeah, I don't know if I like quite as much as you do. I really kind of scared off by the blowout factor. Denver has been playing pretty bad lately. I mean, they blew out the Wolves the other day, but that I don't really put too much stock into that. San Antonio at home against this Denver team that with a new coach, weird rotation, some injuries. I don't really know if they're going to need Kawhi to do a whole lot. I mean, the matchup profile is great, but I don't know if I'm going that route. I think I would rather go with Rudy Gay for a very similar price. I think Rudy Gay is 7.4K. Kawhi Leonard is 7.3. But Gay has the matchup against Orlando, who ranks dead last against small forwards. This is going to be a tight game. The Kings are favored by 1. So, I mean, it's essentially a pick-'em on the road at Orlando. 202 over-under. So I think this is a great spot for him. And you can take comfort in the fact that there's a high probability that he'll play 4 quarters in this really good matchup.
Yeah, I agree there. I think that's a great point. And moving down a little bit further, there's another guy that I'm going to like more if news comes out about Terrence Jones and Patrick Beverley, who are both questionable, especially Terrence Jones. Josh Smith, 6,300. Obviously, always inherent risk with Josh Smith. Been playing really well since he came over from Detroit, coincidentally, playing against his old team tonight. 6,300. Been a great point per minute kind of guy recently. 34 in just 21 minutes against Memphis last game. Obviously, you're not expecting those type of numbers, but if Terrence Jones sits out, he becomes one of the biggest beneficiaries, along with Donatas Motiejunas down low. So I like him quite a bit, especially because Detroit, not known as a good defensive team, especially down low.
Yeah, one question with that, and not to get too sidetracked here, but do you believe in the revenge factor at all?
I mean, to some extent.
Smooth going up against his former team, there's some hard feelings there with the way he left, and then Detroit went on that winning streak after he left. So, do you think he has something to prove there? Do you think that plays in, or you just don't like to think about that?
I am a fan of revenge factors to some extent. I mean, I think the deciding factor for me, obviously, for me, is Terrence Jones. But at the same time, I think it's a good matchup for him. And if there's ever extra motivation for a guy like Josh Smith, who, at the time of that trade, you don't know if that's basically the beginning of the end for his career. He's kind of had a little bit of a resurgence there with Houston. Remains to be seen how that goes once Dwight Howard gets back and there's less minutes to go around. But I believe in it a little bit. I'm not going to overpay for a guy, but I think that Smith is in a fine spot tonight, given that. So I'm going to add a couple fantasy points in there for the revenge factor.
Fair enough, yeah.
Small forward, down past this, I really do like P.J. Tucker. I don't love the price, 5,900. I think he's in a fine spot against Brooklyn. He's been playing really well. As we know, he gets big minutes. At the same time, though, not known much for his scoring, pretty much a peripherals type of guy. So if he's not knocking down shots, which he's 15 for 23 over his last 2 games, obviously not going to sustain that. So I think he's kind of a risky play, but he's got a decent amount of upside in a tournament. Obvious play here, once again, Danilo Gallinari. He's been very consistent. Big usage, 5,600 going against San Antonio. Again, you don't love the matchup, but he's pretty much playing the entire game, 30-plus minutes. So you looking at these 2 guys? Are you looking at Tucker at all, or is he kind of priced out for you, or where are you looking?
Yeah, I'm really not looking towards Tucker. I would pick Gallinari of the 2. Denver needs him to score, and he's essentially playing like 3 different positions, so it's sustaining his floor time. They have him at shooting guard sometimes, small forward, and power forward. He can play all 3 of those positions, so they look to him to knock down shots, and I mean that's going to be his role again tonight if Denver has a chance in this game.
Yeah, especially if he sees a lot of time at the 2 and Wilson Chandler ends up being at the 3, locked up against Kawhi Leonard. That's going to definitely open up some more opportunities for Gallinari because, as we know, Leonard, a very good defender, one of the best perimeter defenders. So Moving down lower at small forward, not a whole lot that I like, honestly. I'm looking at my list here, and it's pretty much risky guys you're looking at low. Is there anybody else you're looking at here, cheaper, under 5K?
I kind of like Andre Iguodala. I mean, this is one of the highest totals of the night against Dallas. I think the matchup really plays into his favor. He's still coming off the bench, but seeing decent minutes. He could see some garbage time as well if this one gets out of hand, so I wouldn't be too concerned in that regard. But 4.5K, I mean, I don't think he has immense upside, but I think he's someone to consider as kind of a cash game filler to hit value at about 25, 26 fantasy points.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you got 6 straight games of 30 or more minutes, and each of those games with at least 22 fantasy points. So I think I'm with you there. He's a great cash game play. Not a ton of upside, but you really don't need it at that price tag. I mean, you get, like you said, he gets 25 fantasy points somewhere in that range, and he more than pays off his tag. Outside of that, I'm not dipping too deep at small forward tonight on this big slate. Is that about the end for you? Kind of
Yep.
Iguodala's the line? Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, makes sense. Moving on now to power forward, obvious top option of the night. Came back with a vengeance, kind of overshadowed by the near 100-point fantasy performance by Russell Westbrook the other night. But Anthony Davis in his return against Detroit, 81 fantasy points, 39 points, 13 rebounds, 8 blocks, 3 steals, 2 assists, 1 turnover, and 1 foul against those big men. I mean, when he's healthy, he is absolutely unstoppable. And this Boston team down low, just the thought of this matchup for me is I feel bad for Boston. It's embarrassing. I mean, it's going to be ugly. He's going to dominate down low. If this game stays close, then I don't see any way he's not the top scoring power forward tonight.
I know. I mean, the matchup is great. I mean, he's at home. He has higher splits at home. I think, yeah. I mean, I'm gonna have plenty of Anthony Davis tonight, and yeah, he's a great play.
Yeah. My only concern being, I mean, it is a 7-point spread. Avery Bradley didn't travel with the team, so that's a little bit of a scoring option that's out for Boston. But at the same time, go ahead.
I meant to mention that when I was doing the Isaiah Thomas, talking about him.
Yeah.
That I mean, yeah, you can even see a higher usage rate than his already insane high usage rate with Boston. So, yeah, kind of goes into that.
Yeah, great point there. And I mean, really, no one that can stop Anthony Davis down low right now. So you gotta anticipate that he dominates down low. So moving down just a little bit here, Pau Gasol a little bit too pricey for me in a slow-paced game against Indiana. Not a guy I'll be targeting. My number 2 option here is going to be Paul Millsap. He's 8,200. We know Kevin Love not a good defender. Already mentioned, great game or big game, good matchup for him. The price tag isn't great, but I think he can easily pay that off tonight against Kevin Love. So is he a guy you're targeting tonight as well?
Honestly, no. I don't have a problem with him really, especially in this matchup. It's a tight matchup. He's going to be seeing a lot of minutes because Atlanta really wants to win this statement game. And he's a guy who can really fill it up in blocks and steals and everything. But if I'm going around that range, I'm probably going to take a discount in Zach Randolph. Great matchup tonight against the Lakers. He's 7.4K on DraftKings, which that's a pretty steep discount. He's 8.3K on FanDuel. So I would probably go with the savings and take Zebo.
And the matchup against the Lakers. I mean, we don't need to tell any of you that there's no one down low for the Lakers that can bang. I mean, you've got Ed Davis, Jordan Hill, both those guys, decent rebounders, inconsistent. You don't really know who's getting the minutes. So Randolph definitely in a great spot.
Yep, there's a little bit of a blowout concern there. But, I mean, and that's probably the rationale where you would want to bump up to Paul Millsap just to pay for a little more security like that. But I really like the discount there.
Absolutely. And next guy, you were mentioning him before the show. Another ridiculous discount, one of the biggest ones on the night. Draymond Green, 7,100. Obviously, there's a little bit of blowout risk in this one as well, like we mentioned earlier. But Draymond is the one player of the starters for the Warriors that does still see a little bit of time if the game kind of gets out of hand. And coming off one of his best performances of the season, 60.5 fantasy points last time. And it doesn't really matter who he matches up with on the Dallas side at the 3 or the 4, wherever he's playing tonight. He could fill it up in a hurry. So I think he's a phenomenal play on DraftKings
I
tonight.
really wish they had him at small forward on DraftKings. That would kind of make life easier. It would be less opportunity cost there. But you could also put him in your forward spot, the second forward spot down the line, or utility. So you kind of have that flexibility on DraftKings. But, yeah, he's definitely someone I'm considering.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrence Jones mentioned he's questionable. If he is a full go, I think he's a fine play at 7,000 because he's got nice upside. Looking right below that, I think the next obvious play is going to be Kenneth Faried. We mentioned already, not a great matchup against the Spurs, but he's finally getting minutes, and he's a guy that's playing well. I actually don't mind his matchup tonight against Tim Duncan. I think he's got the athleticism to hang with him tonight. What do you think?
I don't want to do it. He's a volatile option to begin with, and then, you add the blowout factor and just the Spurs into that mix on the road. No thanks. I really don't want to go that route. I think there's better power forward options. I would probably go up to, like we said, Zebo, or maybe go down to Mirotic or Monte Unis before I went that route.
Yeah, and Mirotic, the guy, great play here once again. Much more expensive on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel, but we'll get into that in the FanDuel podcast. Playing big minutes now, especially with all the injuries that the Bulls have. 42, 35, and 42 fantasy points the last 3 games. He's kind of doing it all. 8, and 9 rebounds the last couple games. He's shooting threes. He's doing it all. I mean, he's an obvious great play tonight, despite the matchup at 5,700.
Yeah, if he fits into my lineup nicely, I'm going to be happy about it, and I'm going to keep him there. But on DraftKings, I don't know if I'm going to fall over myself just to plug him in. I mean, the production has been great. I'll likely have some shares, but I don't think he's going to be on every single one of my lineups due to that increased price point.
Yeah, understood. Definitely much cheaper on FanDuel.
Yeah, he'll be in every one of my FanDuel lineups.
Oh yeah,
I can tell
he has to be. You mentioned Monte Unis a little bit ago. He's more of a play if Terrence Jones sits, but in a fine matchup, 5,100. I'm not doing too much with him if Jones ends up suiting up for this one, so monitor that situation. I think you're on board with that same thinking.
Yeah, 100%.
Great. Moving on down a little bit further, gets pretty ugly, and then it gets a little bit uglier. The only guy I'm looking at cheap that I think could be a decent source of value, and this is only if he starts again, Marvin Williams, last game against Brooklyn, 26 minutes, 32 fantasy points. He doesn't have huge upside, but if you're looking for a cheap cash game play, assuming he starts, I think he's a fine play at 3,700.
Yeah, he's okay. I think there's a lot of volatility in there. I mean, sometimes they don't need him. Sometimes they do. But I really wouldn't go that route personally. But
okay. Yeah, down cheaper now. Really no one else I'm even considering, even for a second. Anybody else you're looking at here?
No, Monte Unis was the last one I had on the power forward, so I don't know if I'd dive cheaper than that.
Okay. All right, moving on to center. Top option here. DeMarcus Cousins, 9,500, one of the cheapest tags we've seen him at all year. You were talking before the show with me about how a lot of people seem to be slaves to the game logs, and I tend to agree with that. If you look over his last 4, it doesn't look that impressive, but even his last 2 games, 47 fantasy points in 29 minutes against New York. Obviously a tough matchup the very next day at San Antonio. He still had more than a point per minute, but just played 22 minutes. Think he is in a great spot against Vucevic tonight, who is not known as a good defender.
Yeah, this is really a fantastic situation for him. The price point really couldn't be much better. You're not going to see him this low probably for the rest of the season unless something fluky happens, an injury comes up, or he gets tossed in the first quarter, which he hasn't done that lately. Kind of proud of him. I mean, he's kind of reserved his temper, but yeah, this is a great matchup. Orlando ranks 25th in fantasy points allowed to centers, also 25th in rebound rate. Like we mentioned before, it's a 1-point spread. Should be a tight game. They'll need Cousins down the stretch. The only problem I'm really having is there's so many good top-tier plays. Anthony Davis, Stephen Curry, James Harden, LeBron James. How do you fit them all? I mean, which ones do you pick? I mean, obviously you kind of want to mix and match for lineups, but yeah, DeMarcus Cousins has probably one of the better price points out of all of them. And so, yeah, I definitely lock him in tonight, at least in some lineups, if not all.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you there. I mean, You're not going to see his tag this cheap for very long. Probably not even more than just tonight, assuming he does what we expect him to do. And only concern with him being the one that you pay for is that there are some other decent options at center. Moving down a little bit, you've got Al Jefferson against Toronto, 7,600. You've got Marc Gasol, despite the blowout risk, still at a great price at 74. Joakim Noah and Al Horford both at 74. Rudy Gobert playing well in a phenomenal matchup where we saw Roy Hibbert explode against Philly, 7,200. So between all those guys, who's your top target there?
I really like the price tag for Al Jefferson, but I'm pretty partial to Rudy Gobert here. I just think there's not really much of a chance he's going to disappoint you in the production department unless he gets into foul trouble. He's been pretty good about that lately. I think there's like one game since he's taken over the starting position after the Canner trade that he's gotten into foul trouble, but he's usually pretty good about that. And yeah, great matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, I mean, I'm looking at his logs here with the fouls, and I mean, he has been phenomenal about it. 1 or 2 total in his last 6 games. So definitely, he's staying out of foul trouble. He's a guy that can do it all. And we saw him. People kind of were off him in the Memphis game, and I was as well for the most part. And 48.5 fantasy points, and that's about as tough a matchup as you're going to get for a center down there against Marc Gasol.
Hey, I told you. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but no, I said he's a guy that really doesn't derive his value from pure matchup standpoint because he's the guy that's gonna rebound for them, regardless. I mean, the ball comes off the rim, he's there.
Yeah.
So
and you know, I forgot that you had touted him that day. So props to you with that huge call because I know he was very low owned that night, and 24 rebounds, his career high. That was absolutely enormous. Against Philly tonight, like you mentioned, matchup doesn't get any better for a center. Rudy Gobert playing as well as any center in the league. I think he's my dollar for dollar top play as well if I'm not paying for DeMarcus Cousins. So I think he's in a great spot. Moving down a little bit lower, you've got guys like Marcin Gortat. His price up a little bit, 6,200. I'm not in love with him tonight against Hassan Whiteside. I think he's a little bit risky. I could see Alex Len coming off a big disappointing game, which you called that as well in your Pulse article, saying, be wary of foul trouble with Alex Len tonight. Everyone slotted him to their cash games. 2 fouls, I believe, in the first 3 or 4 minutes, and just a complete dud. Just never really got in the flow of the game, and he had 5.5 fantasy points there. So an absolute lineup killer that night.
I don't think we're going to see that from him tonight, though. I mean, if you look at Brooklyn, how they score points and how they attack the rim, which they don't really, there's a smaller probability he's going to get into foul trouble. So we could see 30 minutes from him again, and at a lower price point, there's definitely some merit to considering him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and especially in tournaments, like you mentioned, Brooklyn likes to touch the floor, shoot a lot of jump shots, which should add to his rebounding totals, should keep him out of foul trouble, and people are going to be off him, like we mentioned in the game logs earlier. People are going to look at that and see 5.5 and say, no, I'm not touching Alex Len. But he should see mid-30s, and I think it's a great spot for him tonight as well.
Yep.
Looking down cheaper, the answer to me is no. I'm not touching any of these cheap centers. There's too many good options up top. I don't think I'm going to be going any lower than Alex Len. Anybody else you looking at down there?
No, he was at the bottom of my list too. So.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for us here. Make sure you get your spots in that main event tournament, $20 to get into it on DraftKings, $100,000 to first place. You need to come take it before I do, but that's the plan. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here, man?
Nope, that's it. Good luck to everyone tonight, and there's a lot of great contests up, like Justin mentioned, and take advantage of that. It's a great night to play NBA DFS. So.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks again with hanging out for us today, guys. The Daily Fantasy Cafe, we've got a lot of great content. Check out the website, dailyfantasycafe.com, and good luck tonight.